So I'm going to show you guys probably the future of development, and what I'm going to go over is just quickly show you how it works with like a live example, and then show you how to set it up and some other stuff towards the end. So right off the bat, what I have in front of me is my local site, my dev.local. This is on a Windows machine running XAMPP. It doesn't matter what you're using for your local dev. Git runs on anything, so it really doesn't matter. And here is my remote site, which is a live site. It has a funky URL, but it's a functioning URL, and it could be a .com or whatever. It doesn't matter. And we're going to be using GitHub. So when I work on my local site and use Git and then push my changes up to GitHub, the live site is going to automatically change, and so that's pretty cool. And so I'm going to show you a live example of doing that right now, and then I'll get into how to set it up. So here's my live site, default theme, default everything. I'm going to open up just something simple in 2011, like the index file is the loop, and above the loop I'll just add something. Just, it's just an example. It's not really useful, but let's call it div class test, and I'm just going to say echo some HTML. What should I echo out? I guess the site URL. This is the site's URL. And I'll just use a default WordPress function for that, which I think is site URL. Pretty simple. And so what's going to happen is hold on a sec. I'll just save this and see if it works. I've never worked with 2011 before. This is the site's URL, and it didn't work. And that's because I didn't echo it. That'd be a good idea, right? So this is the URL of the site. It's just a WordPress function I threw above the loop. And of course on my local it's dev.local. So I'm going to just push this change up to, this sort of assumes you know how to use Git a bit and GitHub. If you don't, check it out. I'm going to commit the change I just made, just adding a dummy demo thing, and push it up to GitHub. Of course, you have to set up an account with them, and you don't have to use GitHub to do this. You could use the other sort of site. There's other sites that do it. So it pushes it up to my GitHub account. You could always check it, like if you go into GitHub themes 2011, and I altered the index, which would be here, and so you just see this stuff I just put in there. Now we go to the live site. We didn't do anything other than go to the live site, hit refresh, and there we go. This is the site's URL, and you see the actual URL, WordPress blah 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 .orchestra.io. So I'm going to show you guys one more thing before we get into how to set this up, and that is to drop a theme into the live site. If we go to the dashboard and appearance, this is the this is my local site. Hold on a sec. Here's my live site. Okay. There is only the default 2011 theme, and since this is a PHP cloud, there is no real server here. Like, there's no files, you can't log in, you can't do anything like you're traditionally used to doing. You can't install themes or plugins without first installing them locally and pushing them up to GitHub. And that's a good thing, because it enables you to test out, stuff before you push it to a live site. I think it's a really good thing. The same goes for images too, though, since there's no sort of I mean, you could push images to GitHub, but if you're writing a post or doing some content in WordPress itself, the server won't allow you to upload images. So you have to use a CDN like Amazon or Rackspace or any of those guys. And, you know, that's something to keep in mind, that there's no actual server in a traditional sense here. It's just a PHP cloud application. But I'll show you how to install a theme. Here is on my local environment, and in another completely different WordPress install, I have a lot of themes here. I'm going to copy one called WP Scale, and this is the WordPress we're working on our local environment. It's a default one, and I'm going to just paste this theme directly into the themes folder. I'm going to this theme has a git. I'm not going to commit a git in a git. I'm going to delete that. And we go back to the command line and we simply add it up to Git. Or we add it to Git and then we add it to GitHub. I'm going to commit it. Those errors you could ignore. It's just like Windows errors. Adding a WP Scale theme. And then we simply do a git push. And of course, you could always check on GitHub if it works. So we click refresh, and we see the theme folder that we just pushed up there. And now if we go to the live site and hit refresh, it didn't show up. And that is because it takes about a minute for the changes you make on GitHub to be caught by. I mean, I'm using orchestra.io. They do it in about a minute, sometimes less, sometimes a bit more, but it's approximate. Okay, so I paused the video because I didn't want 20 seconds of dead air, but I hit refresh, and as you can see, the theme is now on our live site, and we could just activate it and visit the site, and we're all good. So you could do the same with plugins. And it's just code. I mean, any code-based file changes you push up to GitHub are reflected on the live site. The next part, I'll go into how to set it up and how to get around some of the sort of differences, because we're actually using Nginx instead of Apache, and there's a lot of caching with Varnish. So there's some sort of tricks you have to do to get around that. Okay. So how do we set all this up? Let's go through the process. It's a bit boring and long, but let's get through it. Here we go. We have my local dev environment. It's dev.local. I'm running XAMPP, and this is a Windows computer. It doesn't really matter what you're running for your local stack. We're going to need a GitHub account. And orchestra.io is our, I guess, PHP cloud application, which is where our live site's going to be. And you're going to need Git. So we'll open up Git. This is Git bash, basically, and what we need to do is initialize the WordPress that I just installed on my local host. Just to show you what that is, I just installed the latest WordPress and unzipped it on my computer. This is like the dev release 3.3 beta or something. It's not the stable version, but it doesn't matter. So here you see like all the default WordPress files. So let's initialize it. Initializing Git is pretty simple. You just type git init, and we'll see here it created a Git folder. It's basically a database. Now we have to queue the files, which is all the WordPress files we want, because GitHub's acting as a file server. So we do git add, and then we do a commit. And it adds all the the files. At any time in Git, you could type git status to see what's going on, and it should say nothing. See, there's nothing to commit. Everything's good. The next thing we have to do is go to GitHub and create a new repo. So just click New Repository once you have an account. And we'll type a project name, just call it WP push. And just I'll just write testing in here. And create repository. Here you get sort of the default config screen when you create a new GitHub repo, and since we already have an existing repo that I just created right here, I'm just going to copy and paste the remote add lines, which is basically saying to your local Git to use this URL as your remote repository. So I'm just going to copy and paste those right into the command line. And we have to do a first push on the master. And this is going to push everything up to GitHub. This assumes, of course, you're somewhat familiar with Git and you have an account and you've set up your keys and whatnot. You know, because you have to. This is going to take about a minute or two because the whole install of WordPress and whatnot is like 45 megabytes, I think. One thing to say too in this install, I'm using a public repo for this demo, and you're not going to want to do that for for a live site because your WP config will be exposed and anyone could browse your credentials. So use a private repo or don't commit your WP config or any sensitive data to any public repos. And you could do that. You could have a sort of a private one and a public one and connect them all up. There we go. So now it's uploaded. If we just click refresh on GitHub, we see all our local files, which was a basic WordPress install, are committed up there. And that includes WP config. I think I have it in there. No, I don't. But the sample's here. We're going to have to commit that anyways to get it working. It doesn't really matter now because the next step is to actually create the live site and then hook it up. So I'm using orchestra.io. There's other services out there that do sort of PHP in the cloud. I chose these guys because they just made it so easily. You just basically put in any remote Git URL and it hooks it up. The other services, you know, they required you to sort of log in and create your own Git repo on the server and then push to Git, and then so they added, you know, another layer on top of that. I think they're kind of missing the point. There was one other service, I think it was called Pagoda Box, that had a very similar setup as Orchestra, where you just, anyways, let's just log in and you guys will see how easy it is. I already have an account here. I'll just log in. Comes with two sort of apps. They have the free app, which is it comes with the free MySQL and a couple other tools. The Elastic app is the paid version. It has all sorts of sort of backups and redundancy and add-ons and stuff, and email as well. You don't get any email server with the free app. So you simply click Deploy Free App. You give your app a name. I'll just call this WordPress demo push. The repo URL is simply at least in this case, it's my repository URL. It's the git read only URL, which is this button here. The HTTPS or the SSH don't seem to be working. I think they might work if you have an SSH key, but we're using a public repo, so we're not going to bother. It allows you to define your branch. We're staying on the master branch. And then the index file is important, so that's like the controller. It sort of, WordPress needs it to start up, and the index file's in the root of our install, so we're going to delete the public. And we simply click Launch App. This takes about a minute or so as they initialize, so I'm going to pause the video until it's done. That was actually really quickly. It only took about 20 seconds, and this is the screen you see when your app's deployed, and you simply click Go to My Apps. Here you go back to the default dashboard, and you usually have a list of apps here. We only have this one that we just created, and you click on it. You get your repo URL, which is where it's pointing to, which is our WordPress install, and then you get your public host name, which you can click on. And this is your URL. It has a weird, .com. It's not a .com, rather. I'm just using it as a subdomain, and it's orchestra.io. But I'm not sure, but I think you need to pay for the Elastic app to define your own .com or point it to wherever you want. So this is the live site. You could visit it now from anywhere, and of course we get a database error because we haven't hooked up the database to WordPress yet. And this doesn't get any easier than this. You just simply go back to your dashboard and click New Database, and it creates one on the fly for you. And that's it. It's already created. Re-click your app, and you get all the credentials for your database that will go into WP config. One thing to note, you don't have to use Orchestra's sort of cloud MySQL. You could use Amazon RDS, and I did use it before, and it works perfectly. Or you could use any sort of MySQL remote database. So we have to take all this info and put it in our WP config, and then push it up, and the site will work. So I'm going to open up WP config in the root folder. And enter all this stuff. So I'm going to just pause this while I copy and paste it in there. Config, you can see it here. It has the password. The remote host is the IP address. So we save that, and we're going to commit it. I modified some other files, so that's why we see 3 files here. WP config is the one we just made. Before I made the video, I was fooling around with some stuff, so there's going to be a new file that I made, and also I changed a function in 2011. So let's not bother and look at that, and let's just commit it. Adding the config, and then we just do a git push. I got rejected here because I believe I altered it from another computer, and so my local copy isn't the most current copy. So I'm just going to, bear with me here a minute, I'm going to just pull it in, and it'll update it and then repush it. Yeah, sorry about that. I had to pull the latest version down and then just push it up again. And so if we go back to GitHub now and we just click refresh and click on WP config, we'll see all the database credentials that we just added in and pushed up there from our local dev environment. And if we go to the live site and hit refresh, we should get the 5-minute install. And we do. So everything worked. I'm just going to put demo pushing, whoops, WordPress. I'll just enter whatever here. And we install WordPress. And here is the live site. Oh, I edited the background when I was checking something. So this is the default theme, and it just has a blue background. And so, yeah, this is the live site, and it's now synced with our dev site. So any code changes that we push up to Git will now automatically change on the live site. So one important thing to know that after we set the remote site up and everything's working, we have to fix the WP config. And the reason is our app uses these database credentials, which are obviously the remote MySQL, and your local host is using your local host MySQL. And so since we just pushed this up to get the site working, if we go back to our local host, we get the error because of the credentials we just put in WP config. Now, to get around that, there's a couple things we could do. I'm going to do what Git. It's hard to ignore things in Git once they've been committed. And so instead what I'm going to do is another command which sort of just, I don't know how to explain it right. It sort of tells Git that it's been updated even though it hasn't been updated. So you're kind of like tricking Git into thinking it's been updated. And the command for that is called assume unchanged. So I'm going to write that in just so you guys see what it is. We're going to do a git update index assume unchanged, and we're going to do it on wp config.php. So now whenever we change wp config on our local host, Git's going to assume that it's not been changed. And this is typically used for temporary sort of things. It's maybe not the best solution if you're working with multiple people and stuff, but the alternatives are to just not use the WP config, but in case of Orchestra we have to. There's no file system there. And the other alternative would be to use something like a conditional in your config, which would look like this. It's basically a switch getting the server name, and so if your dev is local, use these credentials, and if it's if it's not, use those. There's a couple other things we could do, but I'm just going to tell Git to ignore it. So let's just go back to our default local credentials, and when we do a git status, we should see nothing. Let's just do that quickly. And so git, if I could type it. And so we see, even though I changed the file, there's nothing to commit. And so when we refresh our local host again, we see we get the site. And so when we do any commits now to GitHub, nothing will break. It'll just there's some problems with ignoring it, because then you might forget it, and it's a little difficult to figure out too what's been ignored if you're working on a large project and you're starting to ignore lots of files. So keep that in mind. Just to note too that Orchestra takes about a minute. I guess I'm not sure, maybe they have a cron running or how their app is deploying, but between the sort of them fetching the GitHub info is about a minute. So when you push up to GitHub and you click refresh right away, sometimes the changes aren't applied right away, and you have to wait approximately. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's instantaneous, but the max you're going to wait is about a minute. That's for code changes. They're actually running, they don't run Apache, they're running Nginx with sort of a custom varnish cache in front of it. And that means that it caches a lot of stuff, and it makes it a little more difficult to work with pushing CSS, JavaScript, or any images. I think the cache lasts 8 hours, so it's pretty long. And so if you're deving on, if you're changing CSS or JavaScript, you have to put versioning into your CSS. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is because it's on Nginx, you have to be a bit careful. So any plugins that sort of use Apache and htaccess aren't going to work on Orchestra. And that includes, sort of the default permalinks as well. So if I just click the hello world that comes with WordPress, and it has, of course, the default permalink structure. If you want to change it to say like post name, this is the latest dev, so it has post name in here, and you'll see the index PHP is appended on it because there is no htaccess. And so if I hit save changes, and then I go back to hello world and refresh, we'll see it's added the index PHP, and that's because it's the server's Nginx. And of course we could get rid of that. I'm not going to go into it, but WordPress works on Nginx for pretty permalinks, and it's pretty easy. I mean, all you're saying is get rid of this part. But there's plugins that'll do that. I'm not sure if they should work. That's a good question. I'm going to try that out and see if they actually work, because we can't write to there is no real file system on Orchestra. In fact, you can't even log in. Like you don't even get access to the command line or anything. There's no FTP. There's literally nothing. So I'll install the Nginx plugin and actually see if we could alter this. So that's about it. I'm gonna try to install the Nginx plugin. I don't really know much about it, but let's see if it works. Obviously you can't install plugins on the live site because there's no file server. Everything has to go through Git. So I'm going to install it. It's a bit weird because now I have my local host is running Apache and I'm installing a plugin for Nginx, but let's just see how this goes. So we just activate the plugin and we're going to push it up just using the command line. Whoops. Okay. Those are Windows errors. What was I going to do? Git commit trying Nginx plugin. So of course we have to push the plugin up into GitHub for it to be available. So if we go back here just quickly and check in our plugins folder, we see the Nginx plugin was just added. And if we hit refresh on our live site, we see it was added. So that was rather cool. I didn't even wait there. Let's activate and see what happens. Whoops, permalinks. I didn't really read the documentation, so let's see what happens. So it does seem to work. Honestly, I didn't even read about the plugin. I just installed it without looking at what it does. I just kind of assumed it did, and it works. There's other features in the plugin too that I didn't read about. So you could just ignore this. Obviously, we don't have HD access, so it's relatively straightforward to get pretty permalinks working with the cloud and Nginx.